we continue looking at, making plans, our life. God's way, our way. God's plans, our plans. God's goals, our goals. What is it going to be? And as I said last week, I see in any teaching many levels. There could be the one, you guys probably all experience this. There's those ones you hear and you're just like, oh, that just goes straight to my heart. Not necessarily bad. It could be just what I needed to hear or whatever. Then there's the one that's like, that's good. But maybe a month later, it's like, it comes and it's for then, or maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's for the person you're going to be talking with or visiting with later today, or, whatever, that kind of a thing. But God's word never returns void. And, so as we just, whatever place you're in, there's always something to grow or learn from. And we looked last week at how Jesus, fixed his eyes on heaven, on the joy that was on the other side as the strength to carry him through the pain here, the pain that comes in following God sometimes, God's path, God's ways. And, you have this, and it says for us to fix our eyes on Jesus, that we don't grow weary or faint-hearted. It says this is our example, and to be able to look at him who carried through agony, spiritual, physical agony, but said his eyes look to the joy beyond, and we're to fix our eyes on him. And when we are finding the cost in following him, when we find it's hard to surrender our plans and hopes to his, they say, look to Jesus. That's what his life was, a surrender to the Father. And he did it knowing on that other side, the life, the fruit, the eternal reward, the joy that would be reaped. And it carried him. And he's our example. And, we've talked about this, running the race with endurance, asking ourselves, how am I doing in my choices? Do I find my life filled with meaning, joy, peace, satisfaction? Does it come from living his life? Is it that which will endure or prove hollow one day? What are we doing? I don't think it hurts to examine ourselves and ask the Holy Spirit to help us, because he's not going to do it with condemnation. He's going to help us. He loves us. He's a father that loves his children. And when our heart says, Lord, I want to walk your life for me. You made me. I'm yours. Here I am. What parent isn't going to just go, wow, cool, And he's, and even if we're off track, he's going to steer us back because he loves us. And so we've been talking about that. We talked last week about how the landfills of the world are filled with the if-onlys. If only I had this, if only I had that, I'd be happy, I'd be filled, I wouldn't worry anymore. If only I heard this from the doctor, if only I got that, whatever it is. When our if only is anything other than God, it's conditional. It's, it goes up and down like that. And, okay, I'm sure you've experienced, okay, I got that news back and that's great news. But then a week later or 2 weeks later, something else came. Well, if only this took place, or if only that, or whatever it might be. And it's not that those aren't legitimate things to pray about, be concerned about, but when he, not the thing, but the one who gives it is our anchor and our security, we can have more of a consistency. It's like, if I'm tying my freedom from anxiety and all of this into the situation or the item, it's going to travel like this, my emotions. But if I'm tying it to the God who gave me that solution or that item, then whether I have it or I don't, he hasn't changed. It's so, the more I can anchor my joy, my peace, my meaning in life, everything into the one that doesn't change, the more that's not going to fluctuate with changing circumstances. You look at politics, okay, or something like that, and okay, and the traditional Christian take on things, and wherever you stand, that's between you and God, whatever. But okay, so we have this election, and like, oh no, and everything's despondent. Well, if only we take the midterms, and then maybe we do. So now we're all happy till the next election, or maybe we don't, and then we're not. And it's not to say we not concerned. It's not to say, but if our confidence instead is the God who is not caught by surprise, the God who places kings in place, the God who has watched empires and dictators and emperors rise and fall, who has knit them together in their mother womb and welcomed them or rebuked them as they cross the finish line on the other side of their life, the God who is outside of that, if he is my anchor and strength, then yes, I can be disappointed in something, I can be whatever, but I'm not going to be overcome with fear, hopelessness, or whatever. And it's the same with anything. And as we've seen, as we make our life plans, so much that drives us, and we're shifting later today or next week, God willing, into just what is it that makes things temptations for us to not walk in God's plans? Why do we not surrender our life fully? What is it? And we're going to see a lot of it is desires within us that pull at us. And if we give in to an ungodly solution to them, we fall into sin. And if we don't, we resist temptation, as Jesus did. We can move in God's plans and paths. And one of the big things is that we're discontent, we're unhappy, and so we don't trust God to be the source of our happiness, or God to take care of that. And a lot of that, as we said last week, comes from comparing. A lot of times we compare, and you can have a whole class of people. I was telling the men's group that some of the happiest people I ever met was when deep in the jungle of Panama, families of 6, 8 people living in one small grass hut. And some of the happiest, most joyous kids I've ever seen in my life were just, and where a lot of the suicide comes in, not from economic poverty or whatever, it comes in from a disparity. When you are around others that have a lot more, and you start comparing. And that's what starts to get us into trouble. That's what gets us starting to step out of God's will, trying to bridge gaps or things. The world is filled with people that don't have a lot and are incredibly happy and at peace. And it's filled with the people that have what we would say is everything and are suicidal, depressed, hopeless, addicted, because these things just aren't doing it. Comparison. Carolyn came up to me after the teaching last week, and she said when she had begun quilting, that there was, someone came up to her and said, comparison is the thief of joy. And it is so true, and I can picture that. You make your first quilt or two and you're just so proud of it, and then you look and that one's quilt, who's been doing it for 20 years or whatever. I mean, I've done that so often in my life. I'll be so excited, I'll say, and then you look to the left or the right, and all of a sudden the joy is just lost. And so now you have this temptation, do I quit? Do I do something unethical to rise to a new standard? Do I get discouraged? Do I lose the joy that God's given me? And that's when we start to step out, and we start to take things in our own hands. We start to do things that aren't good. And I'm stressing this because I really do believe comparison can lead us down a path that starts to take us out of God's will. Well, if I don't know how to word it, but sometimes following God's path may not put us in the place we think we should be in. And we may start to take things to our own hands. Well, I can't be necessarily because I'm not whatever. Again, as we got talking about this, the men's group, in pastor conventions are famous for, well, how many people are in your church and how many are in yours and how big is this and how that or whatever. I imagine, Rich, probably, in the music industry, even the Christian music industry, you can temptations. Well, how many songs have you written? How many have you cut? How many hits have you got? How many views? How many downloads? How many, it's, and you could be thrilled and feel like, I just wrote this song and it's anointed and God spoke through me and I did this. And then you realize, well, yeah, but look how many hits they got, or look how, and all of a sudden you're not necessarily in that place of peace, or you're making efforts outside of God's will because you've compared yourself. And I want to encourage you that God has a very different economy of thought and judging than we do. One of the most powerful stories to me is again, going back to men's group on Wednesday. Jesus has just gone through, we're in the Passion Week, we're now down to a night or two before his arrest, and basically in this sense, the triumphal entry of Palm Sunday, so that we see Jesus addressing and rebuking almost every religious group, the Pharisees, the scribes, the elders, the chief priests, the Herodians, all of them. He has his moment with each of them, kind of taking the rug out from under them, and all of their religious properness and their, loving the praises of men and the puffed up, and he's, told them, you are like a brood of vipers, you are like whitewashed tombs, you look all good on the outside, but inside you're dead. You're polishing the outside of the cup, but not cleaning what's inside it. Take care of what's inside and let the outside take care of itself. And he's done that. And then there's this amazing moment where he's sitting with his disciples and he's just watching the people put money in the offering box, basically, whatever they do. And all these rich people come up and they're putting all this money in. And then this widow comes with basically the equivalent of a penny. And she puts it in. And as she walks away, Jesus turns to his followers and he said, do you see her? She put in more than all of them. And I'm sure everyone's going, you need to see an eye doctor, you need glasses. And he just says, out of their abundance they gave, out of their extra, out of their leftover, out of her nothing, she gave everything. In the world's economy, it's like, well, they just wrote a check for $1,000 or whatever. She put in a penny. In God's economy, it's like, you know how much they held back from me? Do you know how they only gave to me when it was convenient for them? When they had an extra, they had leftovers? She gave me more than they have ever given. From nothing, she gave everything. And see, this is what I want to encourage you is if this series has been moving you to say, Lord, I just want to surrender. I want my life to be scripted by you. I want your plans, your script, your goal. Be careful of comparison. Be careful, because God isn't looking at the one to your left or right and comparing you to them. He is simply looking at you. What have I given you? And what did you do with it? And someone could say, well, how could I be in God's will? I've been doing this or whatever, and this is only this big, or this is only that, or I only got that many hits, or, I've never led anyone to Christ, or whatever, it might be. And, that person, they pray like it sounds like they're calling heaven down. And that person's led 30 people to Christ. And that person, they stand on a soapbox on the street corner in Paso Robles and preach. And that person stands outside abortion clinics with posters and does that. And that person, God's only saying, did you do what I asked you to do? That's between me and them, whether they've done what I've asked them to do. And everyone has different giftings. Everyone has different. What have you done? Where Marty and Alex can hear this again, most of you have probably heard it, but it's just one of the most powerful things I've heard, is that friend of mine, he pastors, and he was at a pastor convention, and there was a pastor there bragging about his 4,000 member church. And there was a pastor there from Alaska who had 40 people in his church, and he could watch him just shrinking in his seat. And my friend just got ticked off, and he was finally turned to the guy at Fourth. I said, how big is your city? He's like, 400,000. How big's your village? 100. And he turned back to the guy, and he said, so you've got 1% of your city in the church, and he's got 40%. What's your problem? And I know I've shared that. Most of you have heard that, and I'm sorry I repeat my stories all the time, but they work. And that was powerful to me. I was like, so who's God more happy with? And you could go, of course, there's other churches in the big city, and there's, whatever. But the point, I think, is clear. See, God's going, man, I gave you this village, son, and you've got 40% of that village joined together worshiping me. Well done. Awesome. I mean, you look at the talents, the parable of the talents Jesus told, and the guy who he gave 10 to and the guy he gave 5 to both got the same praise. Well done. Enter into the joy of your master. It wasn't like, well, you did even more than he did. It was like, you took what I gave you and you did something amazing with it. And I gave him more because he was ready for more. And he did something amazing. But both of you, well done. Enter to the joy of your master. And as you're trying to walk God's plans, there's one responsibility you have, and that is to be faithful to God. To be obedient, to do what he asked. That's it. The results are on him. But we start to compare, and we start to doubt, or we start to cut corners, or we start to whatever, because we start to compare. And so there's a danger in a couple ways. We start to compare and go, I must not be in his will because I don't have as much success as this person. Well, you have a whole different background, they have a whole different assets, they have a whole different whatever. The other danger of comparison is, I'm doing God's thing, and I know I am, and I'm doing it right, and I'm walking his life, and his plans are in my life, but they have so much more than I do, and I'm just hurting, I'm alone, I'm pinching pennies every month, I'm whatever. Look how much easier it is for them, and they're not even, in worst case, if they're a Christian, you're kind of going, they're going to still go to heaven too. Is it worth it? Is it? And that's where that comparison makes us discontent or self-pitying or whatever. And God says, you know what? There's nothing you are going to do for yourself that is going to bring you joy and peace like just living in my will. I made you. I know what you were made for. I found this week is Ecclesiastes 2:24-25. Remember, Ecclesiastes is written by Solomon, wisest guy on earth other than Jesus. Not a wise guy, the wisest guy. And remember, he tried everything. He's tried wine, women, like 700 wives, plus a ton of concubines. He's tried building projects that rank in the wonders of the world. He's tried pursuit of wisdom. He tried it all. And his whole book, vanity, vanity, meaningless, chasing the wind, in vain, everything. This is one of the things he learned. He said, there's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil and his work. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, God, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? What a simple place. Again, comparison to others causes discontent with our condition. But he said, if a man can find enjoyment in his food, drink, the work God's given him to do, God gave that food to him. God's given him that job. It is from God. Apart from God, who can find enjoyment? And we start to see that theme come out of contentment of things throughout the Bible if we look at it. And it is amazing. Paul said, I have learned to be content with abundance, and I have learned to be content with almost nothing. Because his contentment came from God. And it's there when he's got a platter full of food, and it's there when he's wondering what he's going to eat next. It's there when he's got his head on a soft bed, and it's there when his head is a pillow for a rock for a pillow. And Solomon's kind of unpacking his life here. He's kind of saying, I've tried it all, guys. And you know what? If you can be content with those things that God has given you. This is an amazing passage. Because I saw it from the hand of God. There's your thankfulness. And a heart that is filled with thankfulness is going to have a lot of trouble being a bitter heart, a dark heart, and a discontented heart. When we start to focus on thankfulness, on recognizing every good thing in our life is the hand of the Father actively giving it to us. Every breath, every meal, every friend, every good influencing friend, every smile, every beautiful day, and every drop of rain is God's hand in our life, the creator of the universe, reaching into your life and blessing you. We couldn't have a breath without God. A cell that reproduces without God. An attitude of gratitude. That is right, Kathy. Solomon's saying contentment, not comparison. And I have found, I mentioned this much earlier in this series, but I have found in my life and the lives of people I've talked with and know that when I live for this life, when I live to find my pleasure, my happiness, my joy in this life, I tend to miss that and eternal fruit. I tend to keep grabbing at the things of this world, trying to fill this hole in me, and I get nothing. I'm just not happy with myself. I don't feel good. I know I've missed the mark for God. I don't feel like I've done something of meaning. Maybe I have momentary happiness, but then it falls hollow. But when I live for the next life, when my eyes are fixed on eternity, and I live for God, and I live for crossing that line and hearing, well done, my good and faithful servant, I tend to find both here, now. I find a peace and a joy in me walking in step with God. And I realize that part of my life has contributed to something that's going to carry across that finish line into eternity. And I think that's kind of what Jesus is saying. Those who love this life and seek to hold it will lose it. And those who lose this life will gain it. And I think that's a lot of what it's about. If Jesus lived for this life, he'd have turned away from the cross. He'd have turned away from the things that caused his family to call him crazy and reject him, his own townspeople, to try and throw him over a cliff. He would have chosen a path of comfort. He'd probably have some laughs and fun and some good style, and certainly a much more comfortable, much less costly life. But he would have missed the call. And he would have missed that of eternity, that which carried across the line, and he would have missed the joy of the Father filling him, and of the intimacy of walking in step with the Father. And I think that Jesus gives us that model, and I think it's something for us to pay attention to. He lived for the joy that was set before him. And for the joy set before him, on the other side, he could say on this side, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. You can't do that when you're living for this life. You can't. Because if you're living for this life, there is no way you will trust God and say, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And you probably shouldn't. Because the Bible makes it clear to follow him fully is going to be costly on this side of heaven. So if my focus, my goal in life is to live for the most comfort and joy, and I'm going to leave the word joy out, the most comfort and pleasure I can find in this life, I will not be able to say, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. But when I live for him, for the next one, and here's the catch. Here's the thing that Satan hates when the veil gets pulled. This doesn't mean we surrender all joy here now. It means we discover it. That is the great lie. See, we feel like if I'm living for the other side, I might as well, kiss joy on this side goodbye. God says, no, now you are on the verge of discovering it. Because you are on the verge of being in step with me, the one who holds this universe together, of having your life in step. So many times, I hope this is okay, Marianne. I think you're going to be fine with this. Marianne and I will, she's cringing, but Marianne and I will say when things are right between her and I, there's not much this world can throw our way that we can't handle. But when something's not right with the two of us, nothing else. No matter how neat it is, it's hollow. It's empty. I have to tell you guys, just because of this thing. I ordered this mug, right? It's going to be my new mug on the wall back there. And you guys are going to crack up. It has a big warning sign that says pastor. And it says, warning, what you say may make it into my next sermon or something like that. But anyway, just so you know, I'm very careful about that. But the names are hidden to protect the innocent. But see, God created us to live in relationship with him. And when you're outside of your created purpose, you're not going to have peace. You're not going to have joy. Because those things come from God. Remember, Jesus said, my joy I want to give to you, that your joy might be full. It came in John 15, after he's been talking about abide in me, remain in me, live in me. I am the vine, you are the branches, my life flowing through yours. And you will bear much fruit. And the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, kindness, gentleness, goodness, patience, self-control. I don't know if I got them all, but close. And this is from that, and he says, I tell you these things about your obedience to me, your abiding in me, that my joy might be in you, and your joy might be full. Jesus, when he was getting ready to leave his disciples, and he warned them of the pain this earth would cause them, he said, but my peace I leave with you. Not as the world gives peace. It's a different peace. It's a peace beyond this world. See, these things only come from him. We are created to live in this intimate relationship, his life flowing in our life together. And so these very things that we want that cause us to walk away from him, we miss the very place we can find them. Joy, peace, meaning. See, the devil convinces us that it's his choice to serve God or to be happy. Because if we serve God, it's just going to be this miserable thing. And lay all my dreams and my life aside, and he doesn't care about them anyway. Because we're just robots, cosmic robots on a cosmic chessboard. God says, no, I created you to be my family, my love. I died that we could be restored, not just in heaven, but now. That our hearts could beat together, that I could share my thoughts and mind with you. And this is where my joy and peace will flood your soul. And the world cannot take it from you. But it only comes by moving closer to him, not farther away. That's the lie from the pit of hell. We don't give up joy when we surrender, we discover it. And apart from that, it is futile. It is in vain to try and find it on our own. I want to ask you something, and I'm just praying the Holy Spirit conveys this, because this is so huge. And every time I look at my words here, they're missing the mark. When you hear God saying, that it is futile. That you will not find true joy, meaning, peace, fulfillment, or wisdom apart from him. That he will give you the desires of your heart only after you delight in him. That if you live by your own wisdom and your own choices, even with a half-hearted nod to him, you will miss those things you're actually craving and seeking. When you hear that, how do you receive those words in your heart? This is the crux of everything. Okay, what I'm trying to convey here. Do you see them as coming from a God that is kind of crushing your joy? That is kind of saying, like, you really want these things, and you hear that, and it's like, if I'm going to be a good Christian, I just guess I need to do it. But it kind of just crushes, because you really want to run your way. From a God who's imposing rules and regulations, ought tos and not tos. Or do you see them as coming from a loving Father who is trying to teach you what is true? And even if you do, I guarantee you know people that do not. That this thing I have been teaching for the last now 7 Sundays to many people comes as just a bunch of rules, ought tos, not tos, killjoy, and in many cases an egotistical God that is so self-centered he demands everyone worships him, everyone lays their life at his feet, and he can't even give us the desires of our heart till we first delight in him. And you may go, no way, but I promise you that this is a major lie of the enemy that you will encounter. The distinction here is huge and it is subtle. Please hear me out. And I ask you, Holy Spirit, to open our hearts to see this. If you believe that there is joy, meaning, peace, happiness available apart from God in any level, then what I am saying, what God is saying in here, will be seen as a burden, a killjoy. If you believe there is an easier path to the same thing, then God saying you need to take my path is something you will resent. See, this is the same argument where people say, well, there's got to be many ways to heaven, many paths. If there was any path other than through Jesus Christ on the cross, then God is a child-abusing, sick God, that he would allow his son to go through that if there was any other alternative. Imagine that. Yeah, they can go through Buddhism and they can go through Hinduism, they can go through that. Or, I could nail you to a cross, mutilate your body and pour all my sin upon you in wrath, cut you off from me, and we'll give them that option too. Now they can choose door A, B, C, or D. It all works, right? All come into the same hallway on the other side. No. That would be sick. And it's the same thing here. If you believe there's or someone you're witnessing to or sharing with believes there's any other path to joy, meaning, happiness, fulfillment, I'm talking lasting and enduring, then the path of surrender to God, then everything I have been teaching for 7 Sundays is just a burden, a killjoy, and we kind of grit our teeth because we want to be good little Christians and go, fine. But if you realize that it is the only path, then God is not laying a trap in front of you. He is warning you of a trap. Now we can rail against the way we were created. As I joked about some Sundays back, I wish I could fly, but I don't rail against God that he didn't give me wings. It's just the way it is. You can rail against and say, why didn't you create us if there's other paths? But he didn't. He created us to live in relationship with him. He created us for him. We are his. And as much as us independent Americans may not like that, we were created by God, for his pleasure. He created us to be family. You know, and like the Bible says, the clay can rail against the potter all at once, but it's pretty stupid. You know, the clump of clay going, why did you make me a bowl? Why did you do that? Because you're clay and I'm the potter and I made you and that's my prerogative. You know, I need you. And I love you so much. I died for you. That we would be restored. I gave you free choice. I didn't make you a robot. And knowing that you would choose your own flesh-filled, fallen, broken path, I died to cover that with my blood. And I could spend eternity with you because I love you. I am crazy about you. See, this is that thing that for many people, what I've been teaching, they see it as God imposing a different reality. There's this reality that we can do our thing and find happiness and meaning and pleasure. And then God comes and imposes these rules on it and imposes these ought-tos and tells us we've got to do this and do it his way. And if you feel that there is another path, then that's absolutely a legitimate response. But instead what it is God just telling us what is. God is not imposing anything. He's saying, my son, my daughter, I would be a negligent parent if I don't tell you reality. And here it is. Because I made you, and I made you for a certain purpose, which is to live in a family with me. There's nothing apart from that. You know, and what parent doesn't want to warn their children, that path is going to cost you really bad. That path is going to be a hard one. Here's a much better path. This is the way of life. Trust me, I've lived a few more rodeos than you. I got a few more gray hairs than you. May I share my wisdom of what I have learned about life with you, that you might make the wise choice, but you will be able to make your own choices. And that's the reality of everything I am teaching, is God has recorded in here. He has given us Ecclesiastes. He has given us this stuff that he might share with us. Look, there are not two realities. There's one reality. And I want to warn you about the traps. I want to share with you that your path might follow the path that is the only path of meaning, joy, peace, purpose. It is your created for path. And I am sharing it with you. But what the devil does is he convinces us that there's actually another way. And when we get into talking about the root of temptation, the desire, you're going to see this just blow out of the pages. But isn't that what he did with Eve? Oh no. God knows that if you do that, you're going to become like him. See, there is another path, Eve. You don't have to follow his way. You can find meaning, pleasure, provision, wisdom apart from God. You don't need to be bound by him. And see, that's what the devil comes in and whispers. He plays upon the desires that are in us. That's what James said, and we'll cover that again in a future teaching. But he said, temptation comes. Temptation is not sin, by the way. Okay, Jesus was tempted, but without sin. Sin comes when the desires in our heart get played on and we get tempted and we say yes, and we step into an ungodly path to fulfill those desires. That's when sin comes. Sin doesn't come from intent. Temptation is not sin. It is what we do in response to temptation that is sin. And that is important too, because the devil will have us feel shame about things that we're tempted for or whatever. Oh, I'm just such a lousy Christian. No, Jesus was tempted in every way as we, but without sin. And so this is something that is really important to understand, that God is simply sharing truth with us. He is not imposing on us. Believe me, he is not imposing anything. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given us free will and choice, right? He's not making us do anything. He is saying, my child, here is your Father's wisdom. This is how you were made. Now you can wish you were made differently, but you weren't. This is how you were made. And being made this way, this is the path. This is the user's manual. Okay? You know, how cool would it be to drive to Hawaii? But I'm sure that I've looked at my user's manual, it's going to probably say, do not submerge your vehicle. You know, might not even do that. But although Abigail did get a box of clothes, and it said on the box, open before wearing. So, wow. But, anyway, who'd have thought? Coffee hot, don't put between legs when driving. Anyway, but this is the same thing. If I share with someone God's thoughts on homosexuality or abortion or any of these issues, and people go, you're judging me, you're so judgmental, you're so whatever. I'm like, no, I am not. I got my own sin to deal with. I'm telling you what God says. I'm just sharing with you his take on things. And he says that's wrong. And the consequences of those choices are going to lead you to separation from him. There's going to be tremendous cost and pain. And he doesn't call that good. He says, in fact, we're in a day and an age when we call bad good and good bad, and we're in these times. And I would be unloving if I don't share that with you. And that's what God is doing. Here's the path to meaning, joy, happiness, and fulfillment. You have choice. What you do with it is up to you. I'm not imposing a killjoy. I'm trying to protect your joy and help you discover it. And that is something that is so important for us to understand and to share. Okay? I'm gonna close it right there. So Father, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for this time to gather. I thank you for your love. I thank you that you have laid out your truths for us, Father, and thank you. Thank you that you care. You haven't just turned us loose in this world without guidance, but you've given us your written word. You've given us your Spirit alive in us. You are Emmanuel, God with us. You have promised to never leave us or forsake us. You have prepared in advance. You've gone ahead of us and prepared the plans and paths. And you've given us free choice. Thank you that you love us so much, that you care about us and want us to know what is true and right and where joy and peace are found, Lord. Thank you. Thank you for this precious family here, this fellowship, and those who couldn't be here this morning but are going to watch this later, Lord. Thank you. Thank you again for all the wonderful praises shared today, and ask for your favor, your protection, your divine guidance, and your divine appointments in this week ahead, Lord. May we shine bright and bring you glory. And I thank you and ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.